7,000 milliamp hour silicon carbon battery, 80 watts of wired charging, 6,000 nits of peak brightness. Insane spec, all for just less than £550, euros or dollars. So that spec sheet on paper will embarrass quite a few flagship phones out there. But the question is it all just numbers, or is there something there with a bit more substance? Let's break it down. Right off the bat, the Dimensity 9400E chipset powers this RealMe GT7. So when you're comparing it to something like a Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 from last year, you actually get better overall performance, which is wild. And that then makes the 9400E a flagship chipset in this phone that costs less than £550. But in the real world, let's look at gaming performance. You can actually max out Call of Duty in max settings on both. You can then push that gaming experience even further beyond 60 FPS if you enable GT mode in the settings. And what that will do, it will allow for a more smoother top-end gaming performance. So Call of Duty on here runs butter smooth, no issue at all with any drop frame rates, any judder. It works low latency as well. So the gaming experience on here is at that flagship level, which is pretty sick. But on the performance front, we also wanted to mention that 7,000 milliamp hour battery gets you 80 watts of wired charging, and it is silicon carbon. However, when you're pushing this phone's CPU to its maximum, for example, with Antutu, who's running a benchmark on here, you can see here that the temperature and the battery consumption is actually quite high, and the temperature jumps considerably when this is pushed. That, of course, is an issue with thermals. But in our experience, when we gamed on this actual phone for a number of hours, we didn't have any of those issues. So maybe stress testing on Antutu gives you a more extreme result, but in reality, you're probably not going to suffer a lot of those downsides that you've seen on that benchmark test. The performance of the 9400E is stellar. So is this potential triple camera array. You get a Sony IMX906 with OIS built in alongside another 50 megapixel camera and an 8 megapixel ultra wide. And if you flip to the front, you get another 32 megapixel sensor from Samsung, which is the JN5. Now, when it comes to performance from the main lens, you get super rich, contrasty photos with really good HDR brightness as well, and really good balance overall and good dynamic range. So this could be a true flagship experience, and that includes day and night photos, just as we did with the Nord 5 we reviewed recently. This does, again, a really good job of not overly sharpening and overly brightening darker areas, and gives you a true reflection of what that looks like. If you're videoing in night mode on this, however, it can be a bit hit and miss, but I don't know how many people are actually using the video. In terms of telephoto, unfortunately, it's only a 2x telephoto, but it uses a lot of computational photography to deliver some really good results. Even at 20x, you get some super detailed shots, which are very usable. And overall, those two sensors, both 50 megapixels, produce good results. The downside, unfortunately, is in that ultra wide 8 megapixels, very odd choice, and would only output video at 1080p 60 FPS. And then the problem you have here is if you're taking your general photos, you get a lot of softening and vignetting along the sides, and it's even worse if you were to use it in night mode. Back to that main 50 megapixel main sensor, however, you do actually benefit from video at 8K 30 FPS, and you can even film at 4K 120 FPS. So that main sensor is an absolute monster. Flip to the front, that 32 megapixel sensor again produces some decent results. It's nothing amazing, they are usable, but they're not going to blow you away by any way. If you're in a really bright and vibrant environment, it'll actually struggle quite a lot. So overall, those total 4 sensors produce some really good and some really average results. When it comes to AI on the GT7, it has a couple of really unique features, which we'll get to in a second. The OS as a whole screams Color OS. Having used an Oppo Find X8 Pro, a Nord 5 recently, and a OnePlus 13 alongside that, it does scream Color OS / Oxygen OS, but that's not a bad thing, because using things like multiple windows open at the same time is super smooth, and you benefit from all the features of being able to expand single windows and keep both open, as well as hop in between apps. And opening and closing apps is super fast, and then you get tons and tons of customization options within wallpapers, icons, fingerprint scanner, etc. And all that works very well, and the OS as a whole is super smooth. No issue here at all. So that 120Hz display alongside that Dimensity 9400E is doing a stellar job of just making the experience look really good. When it comes to AI, a few things. You get full Gemini integration by holding down this highlighted red, which I kind of love, key, which will give you Gemini Live, or just your standard Gemini for prompts. But beyond that, you get a couple of really cool, unique features. You get AI loop. So if you're highlighting any text on the screen, for example, you could then drag it into your notes or into an app of your choosing, which is super, super sick. And it just gives you a prompt at the bottom to say, it's into notes. You can then view it immediately. So it makes things super, super easy rather than copy and pasting. But the other unique feature actually relates to the back of this phone. So if you're on, say, a website on Nike and you're browsing some trainers, if you double tap on the back here, you'll actually open up an AI feature on here called AI Planner. And what that does, it will actually scan your screen and pick up certain text, such as we have here for Unpacked coming on the 9th of July. And you'll scan that and say to you, do you want to add this to your calendar? You can then click yes, go into the default camera app, not Google Calendar, and it will show on there. Actually super, super unique. And I'm wondering if they expand that further to make it a bit more like the Essential key and the Plus key that OnePlus have and Nothing have separately. That would be a super, super useful feature. Overall, the experience in its totality is excellent, super smooth, no issue at all when it comes to OS, and some really cool, unique AI features as well. The display, rated at 6000 nits of peak brightness with a 93% screen to body ratio. You also get, now we're gonna get technical, 2160 Hertz PWM dimming and 2600 Hertz, of touch sampling rate as well. So the display is super, super powerful, super, super rich in color. It's a 1.5K AMOLED display. Now it could have been higher than that, like a Quad HD, for example, but then you wouldn't benefit from the better battery life. And then if you're watching content back on here, you notice just how slim those borders are with that 93% screen to body, or near 94% screen to body ratio, and it looks excellent. Colors look amazing on here, whether they are just darker and lighter, for example, if you're watching a car video, or if you're just watching back some super vibrant, rich content, like travel videos, for example, again, they produce super, super punchy colors, and this is reflective throughout. So even if you slam the brightness right the way up at 6000 nits, it doesn't dilute any of the screen's resolution or the quality of the display. So what you have in here is a really high-end, peak performing display that does a great job of showcasing content. And when you combine that with that massive battery, that excellent processor, you actually get a monster when it comes to doing any of your entertainment. So if that's browsing the web, watching content, or if you're gaming, you could do it all on the GT7. At that £550 euros and dollars, there are a few phones out there that can compete with the GT7, primarily because it has so many highs and so few lows. The highs, of course, are its display, its excellent charging, its massive battery, excellent high-performing flagship level 50 megapixel main camera with 8K video output, and you also benefit from the silicon carbon tech as well, which is amazing, including some really unique AI and OS features. So there's a ton to love. However, there's a couple of downsides. You don't get any wireless charging, which is a bit of a shame. You will potentially suffer from some thermal throttling as well, as we showed through those Antutu benchmarks. And of course, the camera performance on that ultra wide is meh, as is the front-facing sensor. Overall though, if you compare this phone to something like an S25 Plus, Pixel 9a, or an iPhone 16e, weird comparisons I know, but they all fall roughly within this price bracket, you'll find that the GT7 far outperforms all of those and everything else within this price category. So if you've got a sub £600 budget, you don't want to spend £1,000, 4 figures or more on a new flashy smartphone, then I'd probably say for sure 100% bag yourself a OnePlus GT7. The performance is excellent, the design is super, super nice, especially in this blue and that red key, because it just looks cool, and you're gonna love its camera and charging performance as well, amongst a whole host of other things, including that 6000 nits of peak brightness. Let us know in the comment section your thoughts on the RealMe GT7. Is this something you would buy, or would you default to something else that we haven't even mentioned? And also, whilst you're there, be sure to comment, like, and subscribe. Until the next one, we out.